This plenary is essentially a follow-up on the earlier address. So it shares the same theme as Beyond the Cultural Industry. The chairperson, the person who's supposed to chair this session is having a holiday in Chiang Mai. He needs a break. So I'm chairing in his place, so I'm not Professor Ho Kong Chong. I haven't changed in the last hour and a half. We have 3 speakers, and each will speak for about 20 minutes, and after that we will have a general Q&A session. We'll go according to the order of your program. The first speaker is Professor Stephen Chan, who is from Ningnan University in Hong Kong.
Good morning. Can you hear me? All right. Okay. Thank you. Last year, 2012, in Hong Kong, we have a new administration. And it's a long story, but one of the points that is relevant to this conference is that after the establishment of this new administration, the chief executive, we call it, by the name of Mr. C.Y. Leung, I think a few weeks after he was in the administration, he tried to institute one of his reforms in the government structure. One of the couple of main items is to set up a cultural bureau under the new administration. But due to the unpopularity of him and his administration, in a very rare incident in the history of Hong Kong, the establishment of the Cultural Bureau had not been passed by the Legislative Council, not necessarily because of the unpopularity of his policy to set up a new cultural bureau, which, by the way, is mainly to promote cultural policy in the line of cultural industry and creative industry that we discussed in this conference. So the bureau was not established, and since then there have been very little talk about that because there are much more important things than the Cultural Bureau. And I'm echoing Professor Morris' point about a lot of people thought that this is for them, and therefore they were very enthusiastic and very eager to the issue of the setting up the bureau. But when the problem didn't, when the institutional setup hadn't been realized, people moved on to much more important issues. I'll come back to this point. What I'm trying to do in this 20 minutes is to talk about some of my observations and discussion of the development of cultural policy and cultural industry in Hong Kong. And I'm just very briefly, I'm doing this partly because I've been involved in my various capacities in this matter of the development of a cultural policy, creative industry, and cultural policy studies in general. So first, again, as Megan mentioned, I think she and I have been co-teaching a core course in our curriculum at Ningnan University at the undergraduate level on cultural policy and institution. And I think we agree that this is one of the most difficult courses to teach and for our students, largely because they don't know what we're talking about and why these issues are relevant to them, including such topics as raised in the previous discussion about institutional culture, cultural governance, portfolio of the government, and how it relates to the actual life of people and the actual industry and circulations of cultural products. My second capacity is, so that's my first capacity involving in that teaching. And that teaching itself, actually, I learned a lot from them, from these lectures and discussions with students, which is consistent with my own view about culture studies. And this is part of my attempt also to rethink culture study from that angle. The second involvement I had with is maybe about, I think, 7-8 years ago, I before we taught this course, I think, I was involved in first in the with some artist groups and civil society organizations advocating, better government support and policy, formulation of policy concerning art and cultural policies, and subsequently going to particular aspects like, for instance, business sponsorship in Hong Kong, or issues such as the situation and the survival of small and medium-sized enterprises involved in cultural industries in Hong Kong in the past decade or so. Alongside that, for a few years, now I remember, I was also involved in a number of official capacities. I was a member of Hong Kong's Arts Development Council for 3 years, nominated by the community sectors, and I have been also on the government central policy unit, covering broad array of issues, and I noted that culture was never an issue that was discussed in those meetings. And of course, in my third capacity, I have been doing research and critical thinking, as I said, on the relevance and the directions of cultural policy and cultural industry development. So my thinking is tied with my capacity and also my involvement in the local issues in a very contextual way. I want to begin with a quote, and this is from the former head of the New China News Agency, Mr. Xu Jiatun, who was the top representative of Beijing government in Hong Kong before 1997, and of course subsequently he fled to the West. And in his memoir, this is a famous quotation from him. He said that I have a strong feeling. This is written about must be 10 years ago now. I have a strong feeling that the territorial return 土地回归 of Hong Kong to China is relatively easy, but the heartfelt return 人心回归 of the Hong Kong people is very difficult. When the reunification of land is not followed by the homecoming of hearts, there is no complete return. 10 and 15 years after 1997, I think the situation in Hong Kong has sort of witnessed the truthfulness of this statement. But the context of Hong Kong's questioning of its own identity in relation to British colonial rule before 1997 and Chinese national sovereignty after it must be traced back to the post-war period, especially 50s and 60s, which is a period of rapid economic growth and gradual social reform by the colonial administration, and which is also when people in Hong Kong gradually develop in their daily life practice via the mediation of popular culture produced by what today we would call culture industries, television, comics, martial art fiction, published in newspaper supplements, and all these are in the business sector. None of them are supported by the government as such. But it's through these mediation that people develop in their daily life practice a local and contemporary set of cultural practices, sensibilities, and identity imaginaries, distinct from other urban Chinese centers in the region or in history. Meanwhile, as has been discussed, globally since around the 1980s and 90s, cultural policy at its basic level takes account of both the economic and cultural value of the outcomes it seeks to attain. I'm quoting from David Frosby. So any serious urban cultural plan aims strategically to exploit the dual potentials of its economic and cultural value. On this, I want to make the general point first that cultural policy in our time should allow and support people to generate creative ideas and cultural initiatives regardless of whether one wants to designate such work by the labels and parameters of cultural industry. So at the societal level, we should take policy integrally as a set of strategic local responses to cultural globalization. Ideally, cultural or creative industry portfolio in government and urban infrastructural development should converge to shape policies that integrate local culture, creativity, and socio-economic life. Nurturing local culture, or culture in its multi-dimensional locations, its talents, its business, as well as industry, should become the strategy, or has become, in part, the strategy many cities adopt to meet the challenge of the so-called global knowledge economy. In the contemporary interface, where a plurality of cultural acts meets the multiple vectors of locality, we may be able to consider the ongoing mega project of the West Kowloon Cultural Project in Hong Kong. This is something that I alluded to. I started with before, a long time ago, before they said they were going to build it, and a lot of people objected because we thought it's really a developer's project. So it got hit down, and government redid the consultation and so forth. So now it's being built, and they discover that it is grossly under budgeted, and so it's an ongoing discussion. So there was the discussion. What I'm trying to say for our discussion is that there was from no attention to gradual attention by artists and cultural sectors for this project, and whether that is a developer's project or a real cultural project, to a second agreement being made, and now with public money, the government is going forth with that, and by and large, people have lost interest in it. Except you are sitting in the legislative council having to approve the budget, right? So, but by and large, people have already lost, including quite a lot of artists that I know of, mainly because they didn't think that this relates to their work, and I'll come back to that to that point. The mega project. Sadly, before it has started, it seems that it is facing a hard time to facilitate or to convince people that this project would take and make culture firmly as the local ways of life, and indeed to push it through via a civic process embedded in lived community experience of art making and meaning making. Now, to take a second example, the cultural heritage movement in Hong Kong, broadly construed, which we see evolving in the past 6 or 7 years, has grown as much in the form of a challenge to existing ways of cultural conservation, urban space formation, and cultural management as one of social representation and political institution. So over the last 7 years, it's been tied up with critical questions such as whose heritage is it, who has the authority to do something about it, and who has the right to claim ownership, and so forth. I won't be able to go into the details here, but the struggle over preservation and management of cultural heritage resources, especially when framed in the material condition of the built urban space of Hong Kong, a place where land cost is always already too important, becomes one that reaches deep to the roots of colonial history and culture of governance, including institutional culture and government bureau setup, etc., etc. The logic of that history must therefore be revisited with critical insights drawn from the social visions, cultural values, and community aspirations under the post-colonial condition. If culture is ultimately the source, catalyst, and foundation of creativity to incubate accumulation of tacit creative individuals or talents in any society, our policy must adopt an approach to culture, public goods, and public commons that enhances civic access, diversity, freedom of expression, as well as R&D work in the soft cultural infrastructure, primarily the infrastructure for the education and cultivation of young minds, talents, as well as the making and circulation of fresh discourses among the local population. And hence it is the public sphere, 30 years after 1960, for example, however mediated or remediated, that would condition and permit audience, consumers and prosumers alike, to cherish openness and liberty, to defend or fight free trade and free will, and to debate the condition of possibility in instituting social democracy and human rights in ordinary cultural sites. Understood in this perspective, when we appreciate the repercussions involved when the mainstream policy in Hong Kong differs substantially from those in the local community, whose commitment for a cultural politics has evolved through sustained engagement with issues of identity and locality and the location of community-based identity. And that is why last year, when there was the talk of the possibility of a new bureau, there was, aspirations and convergence of views from the community. And yet, in terms of political reality, it didn't get through. And the disappointment was there, but it was actually not that big. To attempt to think about the effective functioning of the public sphere as a space for such critical analysis where various forces of creativity meet and engage with the power of governmental authority and governmentality as such, let me consider this figure, which is a very rough outline to capture the kind of current thinking about, including by members in the artistic community who feel very positive about setting up creative policies, creative industries policies, and so on. So, but the diagram here helps to capture three dimensions in the production chain of culture industry or creative industry, and the corresponding layers of policy that would actually, or strategy that would, for us to consider. The first is the larger outside circle, which is the creative or the broader social urban environment, so to speak. Policy interventions involved, and this kind of discussion had come up in the course of the last 6 and 7 years in the discussion of West Kowloon, as well as other smaller projects in the community. How to improve social institution, educational system, creative and cultural planning, how to adopt so as to shape an ecology that nurtures creativity, so that enrichments can be realized in civil society and community culture, institutional structure, and so forth. The idea is that the larger environment shapes the system or the formation of a system in the center, which for Hong Kong has been something there already for decades, But in light of the current competition globally, there has been, and other factors, there has been a decline in a lot of the traditional cultural industries. So you have at the center the production system of the so-called new industries, which the government has put on their portfolio, but then there has been very little that has been done so far. And at the core of it, from a government's point of view, of course, we always, and as in the case in other economies, there is this, this attention to record growth in the local economy with advance in GDP and employment figures and so forth. If there is time, we could actually, for instance, talk about a number of processes and look into the way the bigger environment and situations and factors and some possible intervention in the policy in the bigger environment could have an impact on the culture and nurture of individuals in the community. I'm thinking of, for example, the town planning process. I'm thinking of the whole system involving cultural facility and resources management in the community, including museums, libraries, and public parks and public space and so forth. And last but not least, the shaping and formation of what is being called cultural citizenship. I'm running out of time, so I think I would say that by examining my take is to examine the work of negotiation of differences rooted in people and administration and different sectors' understanding of the source of identity and sensibility and culture for the work of individuals in whatever creative work they have in their neighborhood. The fact is that a lot of the policies, and many of them are actually not cultural policies as such, have been killing creativity and local-based cultural work in the community quite systematically throughout the last couple of decades, and in large part of the region of the city, in schools, in neighborhoods, in not to mention in central business districts of the city. By examining close range the relationship between community cultural practice and their local social context and effects, I think researchers and policymakers alike can develop a more integral and perhaps comparative understanding on the people's take and aspiration of a better public and cultural life, and appreciate how such everyday needs and desires are the actual sources and resources of culture in our society. In summary, transfiguration of the local, national, and transnational imagination in a place like Hong Kong. Facing this, we need to approach public culture as practices of space. Such practices are embedded in socially charged space of culture, made publicly accessible, and made in social institutions, in community setups to generate, assemble, and circulate common voices, dialogues, or debates on issues of interest to the community. Right now, we are looking at a great disconnect between most public policies, including educational and cultural policies, and people, especially young people's concern. Let me end by saying that at the core, in my view, of a forward-looking cultural policy in Hong Kong, we must address the following set of issues covering the three dimensions here: creative environment, production system, and growth in the local social life and economy. The following issues: the social imperative to perform, create, and excel, the relationship between globalization of culture and the changing roles of the new civil society today, the productive relationships between trade and culture. with a perspective on the sustainable development of local values and contents in culture, the collective remaking and management of meaningful and valuable social cultural resources, civic engagement in community culture, resulting in more people in the local places making more sense of their own culture, as well as the tension or balance between cultural consumption, social justice, and citizenship. Thank you.